Hi, welcome to our webinar, Building a Resilient Recovery. I'm Chris O'Reilly. I'm fortunate enough to be CEO of AskYourTeam, and I'm also in charge of introductions today. Resilient organisation is a term we hear a lot of these days, and it's no wonder when all around us are organisations being compelled to quickly adapt and change due to the current COVID-induced world of uncertainty with which we're living in. But those organisations that can quickly adapt and change, and most importantly, have a clear process for working through that uncertainty, are the ones that are surviving and in fact thriving. And organisation resilience is at the key and the heart of this. AskYourTeam's been incredibly lucky to be able to partner exclusively with New Zealand's world-renowned experts, global experts in resilient organisations to bring you today's webinar. And two of their experts, Dr. Charlotte Brown and Dr. Tracy Hatton, are going to be co-presenting this webinar today. They're going to take you through 6 key steps that will help you work through the uncertainty and disruption that comes about with something like COVID. They'll be able to also share some of the crucial insights that they've got from this tried and tested approach. Now, during the webinar, if you've got some questions, please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen, and Charlotte and Tracy will answer those throughout at the end of the webinar. So, enough from me. I'd like to introduce Charlotte and Tracy, who are zooming in from my hometown in Christchurch. So welcome.
Lovely, thanks Chris. We're thrilled to be working with AskYourTeam on the very important topic of organisational resilience. Thanks very much for joining this afternoon so that we can share some of this with you. We're going to use sand dunes as a metaphor for organisational resilience. So on screen you have an image of a lovely community, nice big well-planted sand dunes. They add real joy with a great view from the top on a sunny day, and they provide protection from the winds coming off the sea. Resilience is like these sand dunes. It can help us thrive in the day-to-day, provide us with day-to-day benefits, and provide protection from storms, really important. So of course, at the moment we are in the middle of a storm, COVID-19. It is ravaging our economic and our social coastlines. Very grateful that we are here in New Zealand, and the cost of human lives so far has been so very low relative to other countries internationally. But you know, there's a lot of concern, a lot of genuine concern about the effects that this is ultimately going to have on many of our business in the short, medium and longer term. So our dunes may look a little bit like this, unfortunately, at the moment, as we still are weathering the storms of COVID. Some organisations may feel as if they're teetering on the edge. They may have managed to survive so far, but there's a bit of rebuilding now needs to be done to rebuild those dunes and gain back that thriving. So too with those things that contribute to your organisation's resilience. If you think of your financial reserves, your personal stamina, your emotional reserves, and your relational reserves, they get eroded during storms. We know this from the Canterbury earthquakes, and we're experiencing it now in COVID-19. Those dunes, they're your resilience reserves. They get eroded, they need to be reinvested in and built back up again. It might be that you need to pivot or reinvent your business, or not rebuild it in such a vulnerable spot, or just pay some attention to some of your core underlying aspects of organisational resilience. If we use teamwork and collaboration in designing our resilience, that'll increase our future thriving and increase the protection that our rebuilt dunes give us from the future storms in our natural hazard prone country. Each sand dune is made up of many small grains of sand. They each add to the beauty of the dunes, the thriving they bring, the protection they afford. This presentation is all about effectively designing and rebuilding those dunes, looking at some of the individual grains that turn into the big building blocks of our organisational resilience.
Thanks, Tracy. I really like that sand dune analogy. It kind of brings to life something that can be a bit tangible, intangible, and gives it a physical presence, which is really great. So today's focus is really about how do we rebuild those dunes in the midst of this COVID storm. And so as Chris mentioned, we're going to talk through a 6-step process that we've designed around how you could develop an adaptable plan. And then we're going to talk briefly about some of those resilience foundations that sit below that ability to plan and get through this event. So resilience is a big topic. And today we're just going to focus on one part of that, and that's on reviewing your organisation's strategic direction in this COVID world, but also beyond. We've put together a 6-step process to help you develop an adaptable business plan that will enable you to move forward and confidently navigate this uncertainty that we have in front of us. So step 1 of that 6-step process is pretty straightforward. It's to remind yourself of what your purpose, your vision, and your values are. Look, for some organisations, this will be really, really easy. Their vision and values will be part of the language of the organisation and will be visible in everything the organisation does. But for others, this will require a bit more work. But we think that it's a really important thing to do and will set you right on the next steps ahead. So strong vision and values should lie at the heart of recovery for your organisation and should be the guiding light and common thread that holds your strategic thinking together. Step 2 is also pretty straightforward. It's to remind yourself of what you were trying to achieve pre-COVID and the actions that you were taking to get to that place. So if your business isn't doing well during this pandemic, it's really tempting to throw the baby out with the bathwater and discard all your prior strategic thinking. But we suggest you start with your existing plan and review it using the next 4 steps as a guide, just to test whether what you thought you were going to do is adaptable, not only during this pandemic, but through other crises and change that you might face. If you didn't have a plan pre-COVID, don't worry, you can start now. So step 3 of this process is about understanding your current situation, or what we often call it is having good situational awareness. So there are 2 parts to this. First, it's about looking internally and thinking about the capabilities and assets that your organisation has to draw on. And we'd encourage you to think really broadly when you're looking at this. So not just the resources, people, financial and physical assets that you typically might account for, but also thinking about the connections and partnerships and relationships you have, perhaps with your suppliers and your customers. So what other resources can you draw on outside your organisation? Then turn your attention to what is happening outside your business and what might be affecting your business. So this could be demand changes, changes to your supply chain, regulation changes, technology and environmental changes. Ask yourself, are there emerging trends in your key market? What are your competitors doing? What could the economy do? And make sure you get multiple views when you're thinking or answering these questions. You really want to get diverse perspectives to make sure you don't have tunnel vision going on and you've missed something. So this step 3 is really all about taking stock of where you are. So now that you have a good understanding of what is going on now and in the near future, you need to start thinking about what the next 1, 3, 5 years might bring. So this is step 4. It's about imagining possible futures. So none of us have a crystal ball, but back in December, we would not have foreseen a total country lockdown. And we certainly didn't predict the Canterbury earthquakes as they fell, and global changes such as Brexit were also a surprise to many. Look, the reality is we just don't know what will happen, but that shouldn't stop us planning. And what we can do is design our strategy and our business to adapt to whatever the future holds. And part of this is imagining the range of possible futures we may experience. So there are a number of different techniques you can use to develop some possible future scenarios that are specific for your business, but we're not going to go into those methods today. But essentially what you're trying to do is find a range of scenarios that test your current business assumptions as much as possible. So if you're a tourism operator, for example, you might imagine COVID as one extreme scenario. a complete loss of international travel and an economic downturn. You couldn't have really thought of anything much worse. If you're a dairy farming company, for example, scenarios might revolve around climate change, changing sentiment towards animal products, impacts on water quality, or international trade. Like, your scenarios will look very different depending on what industry you're in. And so once you've come up with, say, 3 to 6 different scenarios, you need to think about your current strategy and think, what will work and what won't work across these scenarios. So if our strategy is put into each of these 3 to 6 different scenarios, what is working, what isn't working? And with the skills and resources you have, are there actually some opportunities with your organisation in some of those scenarios? And how could you position yourself, or what could you do now to make you take those opportunities in the future? And then you could also ask, what can you do now that offers least regret in any of these particular future scenarios? So your aim is to design a strategy and prioritise actions that work best across all possible futures. And so for some of you, this might be a little bit of a mindset shift from optimising your strategy for one assumed future to designing a strategy that works across a lot of different futures. Right, so now that you have good situational awareness, you know what's happening now and in the near future, and you've imagined what could happen in the longer term, how do you develop a strategy that is adaptable to change? So this is all about what step 5 is for. So one of the ways to do this is to create staged decisions within your strategy. So often we create strategies as if they're linear. We choose a goal and we take steps directly towards that goal. But with so much uncertainty, we need to think about breaking that journey down into smaller decision points. And these decision points allow us to change direction at any point if needed. And alongside those decision points, you need to think about what might be some alternative paths that we could take at that point. So this is where your future scenarios will help you think about the different paths you might need to take. So continuing that tourism example, this could be investing more in domestic tourism, or changing your price point to attract different clients, or offering a different service. You also need some trigger points. And these are signals that you might find that indicate you need to change direction. So in the tourism example, it could be the opening of borders, or economic conditions changing, or perhaps actions of competitors. So trigger points will depend on your business, but they'll give you an early indication that you need to change where you're heading. Other strategies to be more adaptive include maximising your diversity. This could be diversity of your market, your suppliers, your services, and your staff. It's really easy in a post-pandemic world to think that we need to lock down and have a completely local business model. And there are lots of benefits to that approach. But there is also a risk to that. So New Zealand is really vulnerable to natural disasters, as we all know. And in these times, international networks, customers and suppliers can be very helpful. So diversity can help. And I think as you look through those future scenarios, you will really see that that'll be a key in your strategy. And this leads to our last point on adaptive design. The decisions that you make really need to be equal parts least regret and opportunity. So business is all about taking risk, and you should still do this, but it's about balancing your risk so that all your eggs are not in one basket. Okay, the last step, step 6. So once you've designed your adaptive strategy, it's a really good idea to test your thinking with others, in particular with people or organisations you work with. This is to make sure your thinking is aligned and to test your logic. It is even better if you and your partners are preparing to adapt and move in the same way when there is a disruption. It sounds really cliched, but you will be stronger together. And I know both Tracy and I have seen a lot of examples of that in the work that we've done over the years with businesses who have faced crises. So before I hand back to Tracy, I just wanted to make a final note that this is a continual process. The 6-step process is in a circle for a reason. Well, look, we live in this ever-changing world, and in fact, it's increasingly changing. And our businesses need to be on their toes and ready for whatever comes their way. So you just need to keep reviewing your strategy over and over again.
Fabulous. Thanks, Charlotte. So the ability to both go through the process of deciding that strategy and then executing it requires really strong foundations. So sticking with our sand dune analogy, to make those really strong foundations, we need to use lots of different colours of sand. Our first grains of sand need to come from the leadership and culture of the organisation. So a resilient organisation has empowered staff who are situationally aware and help you be situationally aware. They're part of the decision-making processes. They're highly engaged in their work and understand how it contributes to your whole organisation, whether you're public or private sector. And those staff are able to be part of the innovative and the creative solutions that we often need to cope when we're in the midst of turbulence. Our next grains of sand need to come from our second bucket, that of networks and relationships. The way that our organisations both work internally and the way that they build effective partnerships with customers, suppliers, partners, and all of the other businesses within their ecosystems. Importantly, we also need enough grains of sand to have the space to create or innovate and the space to work on those relationships. When we're all working at 110% all of the time, innovation and creativity and networking are two key things that drop out entirely. Our final grains of sand come from what we call our change-ready capability. These grains are generated by people having a clear sense of what an organisation is actually trying to achieve, what the values are around that, how actually that gets done. Grains are also generated by organisations taking a proactive approach to being willing to rapidly pivot. So it's not enough to only be aware of the situation, you've got to be proactive about doing something about it. As the situation or our understanding of it evolves, you may need to continue to change and adapt. And the final grains of sand here come from the way that we plan and the way that we test our plans. So building these strong foundations of organisational resilience doesn't have to cost money. You can have a look at your organisation today and think about where you may excel and where you may need to put work in. Of course, Ask Your Team has got some excellent teams to help in that space as well, excellent tools, sorry, to help in that space. So in summary, the storms that buffet our organisations can be quite frightening. As small business owners, Charlotte and I have certainly had our moments this year during this COVID-19 pandemic. And for many organisations, including ours, some of that storm may actually be the additional workload and the additional load that it's caused for you, as well as the additional layers of anxiety. So your resilience probably has been eroded by this unprecedented storm. The Canterbury earthquakes were also an unprecedented once in 2,500 year event. We survived those, we'll survive these. Your dunes have hopefully done your job of getting you through so far. You've survived again. We hope that we've added to your ability to rebuild those dunes, rebuild your resilience with our toolkit today. The key elements to designing those resilience dunes have included looking at your strategic direction and situation awareness, and stress testing those with multiple scenarios. And then looking at the underlying organisational characteristics that enable the success of your strategy: leadership and culture, networks and relationships, and being change ready. Now we've just got to cut. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon for a very short tour around strategic resilience. And in just a couple of minutes to cover off just some of the questions that have come through. So first up in our questions, you talk about building a resilient recovery strategy, but could you use those principles to build a strategy during business as usual?
Yeah, I think definitely. Yeah. I mean, as we've sort of said during the presentation, we live in this ever-changing world and increasingly changing, and there are sort of these background trends that are happening in terms of technology changes, globalization, sort of aging population, climate change, biodiversity impacts, etc., etc. I could go on and on. So we're just having to change the way we think about businesses. Our world is increasingly interconnected, and that's creating these really complex, unpredictable crises that we're having to cope with. So yes, I think this is not just about a post-COVID thing. It's
Absolutely.
general.
Yeah. Cool.
What other points have we got there? So once you have your, this is kind of linked to that first question. Once you have a resilience strategy plan, how often do you revisit it, in your opinion?
Frequently. So yeah, definitely linked to that first one, which is we're in this volatile and uncertain world. And when we have volatility and uncertainty, we have to be more willing and ready to revisit our situations on a frequent basis. It depends, of course, on your business and your context. Some of us are more exposed to the volatility than others, and some of us have got things like legal planning processes that dictate some of that pace. But yeah, frequently.
Yeah, and I just draw your attention to one of the points they made around how do you design an adaptive strategy. Is one of the things is to have these trigger points or sort of indicators that you could be looking out for to indicate that actually your assumptions that you've made and where you're heading in your strategy isn't quite right, and some environmental situation has changed, and then you need to review where you're heading and perhaps take one of those alternative paths that you've designed. So
yeah, super.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a great one. What's the difference between personal and organisational resilience? Well, they are definitely two completely different concepts, but of course they do work in harmony to enhance the performance of our organisations. We usually come at it from the organisational side, and we look at how an organisation can either enhance or inhibit the resilience that your staff bring to the door on a daily basis. So you may have a very personally resilient person, a very settled, sorted kind of life and disposition. But if you load them down with far too much to do on a daily basis, with very little control or power over it, you're eroding that personal resilience that they brought to work. Equally, if you turn that around the other way, you can see how an organisation really empowering and supporting and giving confidence to its employees could help to grow if they're lacking some of that outside of work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. I think businesses have got to be careful that they're not the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff with wellbeing initiatives and yoga classes and things sort of supporting the individuals, but then if they have organisational practices, and Tracy's given an example, but additional ones could be, micromanaging or bullying, for example, that will really erode that and will any kind of yoga classes that you have will not make up for the fact that you have not a positive environment for people to succeed in.
Which is, we're all for keeping the yoga classes, don't get us wrong either, or the in-house massage, that's all good too, but that's not the only place to look when you're looking in that resilience absolutely space.
So this one looks like one perhaps for me to elaborate on. So how do you decide what possible futures you should imagine? Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's a lot of different techniques that you could use to do this. One of the ones that perhaps I'll try and quickly explain is where you identify two of the key external drivers that might affect the viability of your business. So if we take that tourism example, those two factors would probably be international travel, the numbers of international tourism, and then the other would be the strength of the economy. And so you take those two factors and you put them on a 2x2 matrix. So you might have your high and low degree of international travel, and then on the horizontal axis you have a high and low or strong and weak economy. And then that creates these four quadrants of a matrix that describe different futures. So one where you've got good international travel and a strong economy, good international travel and a weak economy, etc., etc. And they can kind of create some four diverse scenarios that might test your business. Obviously, some businesses might want to go more than that and look at more than two factors affecting their business, but I guess that's a quick example for you.
Super. Right, so just one last question before we run out of time. So if we want to know more about how to develop a plan, who do I talk to next, and what would this cost?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size of your business. It needs to be right sized, of course, but we find that these sort of processes are better done in a facilitated kind of process where you have a workshop with a range of people from within the organisation to kind of tease out what's important to the business, where you're going, where your key risks might be, and sort of to go through some of the steps that we've gone through today. So yeah, but it really depends on the size of your business.
It doesn't have to necessarily be particularly expensive too, so just to be clear on that. Look, you know, have a chat with us. We love chatting with people, so do the Ask Your Team team, and no obligations, have a chat. See if there's any way that we can help you.
Yeah, and actually some of the work that we've done with Ask Your Team in building some resilience toolkits as part of their software, there are actually some, there's one module in there particularly looking at this resilience strategy, and it sets out a good set of questions to get you a litmus test on whether you're on the right track or not. So that's another place to start as well.
Super. Hey, well, thanks very much. I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you this afternoon, and we'll hand back over to Chris O'Reilly from Ask Your Team to close today.
Charlotte, Tracy, just fantastic. I love the way that you make the process just sort of so straightforward and really achievable. You know, all of us feel it when you get sudden change and then you're having to respond really quickly. It's so easy to just feel overwhelmed. And, you know, what we've got from you today is just so incredibly reassuring that any organisation can follow this process and take the steps towards developing its own resilient plan of attack to deal with the uncertainty, the incredible uncertainty that comes with disruption with something like COVID. So, look, simplifying something that there's been so much research and expertise going is phenomenally hard. You've done an absolutely brilliant job. So thank you so much for that and sharing that wisdom and expertise and experience with that 6-step process. Just marvellous. Look, as Charlotte and Tracy have said, if you want any more information, we've co-designed an amazing resilience toolkit that we'd love to be able to share with you. So thank you very, very much for your time. Now, at Ask Your Team, we love feedback. We know that feedback is a gift. It's in our DNA at Ask Your Team, and it's the currency with which we operate. So I've got one small favour for all of those that have been attending today. After this, you'll get a very short post-webinar survey. Please answer it for us, and please be as honest as possible. The more honest the feedback, the better the value is that we can provide to our clients and to the people that come to these sort of events, and you get the best return on the investment of your time. So don't be shy and be honest. Thank you so much again, Charlotte and Tracy. Resilient organisations, amazing having, you know, globally renowned world experts here in NZ, and we're very privileged at Ask Your Team to be able to partner with you. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Thanks for your time this afternoon. Take care and kia kaha.